Welcome to our 5-minute Bible study today. We're looking, of course, at the book of Revelation, and today we are in chapter 11. Now, we're in between the sixth and the seventh trumpets. You recall there are these 7 trumpets that are sounding, symbolizing the judgment of God. And between the sixth and the seventh trumpet, there's an interlude, and some action occurs. First thing we saw in this interlude was chapter 10, in which John is told to go to the great angel who announces there'll be no more delay, and to take the little book or the little scroll that is in his hand. He is told to eat the book, and then we'll have the words to prophesy to the people. We looked at that yesterday. Now, what was in that little book? What is this little prophecy that John consumes and then prophesies? Well, that's what we find in chapter 11. The contents of the little book, or this prophetic word that John was to give to the people. Now, we see it in chapter 11, but we also see it in the remainder of the book. Now, one of the things we've seen in Revelation so far is that matter of repetition. Oftentimes we see something, and then it is shown to us again from a slightly different perspective or a slightly different angle. So what we see in chapter 11 is sort of what is about to occur. We see it as a large vision. And then the rest of the book of Revelation kind of backs up and repeats what is in chapter 11 with some greater detail. So what we're going to see in chapter 11 is also what we'll see throughout the remainder of the book, with more detail added or more emphasis on particular aspects of it. So as it were, in chapter 11, we sort of get the Reader's Digest version of the remaining prophecy. And then in the remaining chapters, we get the more detailed explanation of what is involved in that prophecy. So let's begin to say what John says after he consumes or eats the little book and then has a word to say. He said, "I was given a reed like a measuring rod, and I was told to go and measure the temple of God and the altar with its worshipers. But exclude the outer court. Do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles. They will trample on the city for 42 months. And I will appoint 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days. They will be clothed in sackcloth. They are the 2 olive trees and the 2 lampstands, and they stand before the Lord of the earth. Now, if anyone tries to harm them, fire comes from their mouths and devours their enemies. This is how anyone who wants to harm them must die. They have power to shut up the heavens so that it will not rain during the time they are prophesying. They have power to turn the waters into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they want." That's the first 6 verses of chapter 11. Now, the first thing we note is that John is told to measure the temple. Take a rod and measure the temple and the altar. That's the altar of sacrifice, the great bronze altar where the sacrifices are made. Well, what's involved in this measuring of the temple? Now, this immediately reminds us of the book of Ezekiel, chapters 37 through 39, where the prophet Ezekiel was also told to measure the temple. Now, in Ezekiel's vision, we know that meant a restoration of the temple, a renewal of the temple in his day. But what does it mean in John's day? Now, I want you to keep a couple of things in mind. John is told to measure the temple. The temple, of course, is in Jerusalem. But at the time that this vision is given, the time the book of Revelation is written, we are in the years probably 95 AD, somewhere around there. But we know that the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans in the year AD 70, some 25 years before. There is no temple in John's day. The Romans have destroyed it. It has never been rebuilt. So what temple is John being told to measure or to see the measurements of? It's not the actual temple, it must be a symbol. Now keep in mind that in the New Testament, the church is seen as the new temple of God. You know, in the book of 1 Peter, Peter tells us that we are like living stones built on He who is the cornerstone into the very temple of God. So the church, the people of God, we have become the temple of God. So when John is told to measure the temple, this is a symbolic way of saying to measure the people of God. And it seems to be measured in the sense of preservation. You are told to measure them and that you may preserve them. Notice it says, when you measure, do not measure the outer court. Now, the outer court is the court of the Gentiles. And so then John goes on to say that's going to be given over to the Gentiles. And they will trample on the city for 42 months, or for 1,260 days. Both those references are to 3.5 years. That comes from the book of Daniel, where Daniel had in the prophecy of the end time sees that tribulation period or persecution period at the end of the age as being 3.5 years. That is referenced here. So what John is saying is that the church, the temple of God, will undergo persecution for 3.5 years, that period of time, which we see in Daniel, in which there's oppression against the people of God, but they will be measured and they will be preserved. So the first thing we see is that when the church undergoes persecution, when the church undergoes harassment, when the church undergoes tribulation, she is protected by the grace of God. This protection does not mean she is free from difficult times. Tribulation does come. But she is preserved. She cannot be destroyed. The church will endure. You remember when we started the book of Revelation, our study, I told you this was a book of encouragement. And this is an encouraging word that even in times of tribulation, even in times of persecution, even in times when things are difficult, the church is measured by the grace of God. The church will be preserved. The church will endure. The church not only will survive, but the church will be triumphant. God's people, we are the temple of God, and God will preserve his people. He will take care of us. So John is told to measure the temple, to measure the people of God. They will endure even in times of persecution. Now we're going to stop here. Tomorrow we're going to pick this up with the witnesses, because even in the times of persecution, the church gives a witness. And so John also sees a vision of 2 witnesses. But we will consider that tomorrow. But as we close today, just remember that even when times are hard, even when times are difficult, God has measured his temple. God has measured his people. And they will be preserved by divine grace. The church will always endure. The church will always be triumphant by the grace of God. Hope you have a great day today, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time for our 5-minute Bible study.